Hey guys, it's Sam, and today I'm doing a book chat on if you need to know the source material for a retelling or a work inspired by that source material. So I got thinking about this because retellings are extremely common right now. They're very popular, especially in the YA genre, but really in any genre. Books that are heavily inspired or response to other books or retellings are super common, and I've read a lot of them lately. But lately, I found that I've read a lot of them that I didn't know were necessarily inspired by something, or I wasn't really familiar with the source material. Like, I wasn't seeking out a book specifically because of the source material and being familiar with it. If anything, I was seeking a book out because I wasn't familiar with that story and I wanted to get more of it. But I found that I've read a couple books that if I would have had the source material, I might have enjoyed more. So this is kind of about, should you read the source material before reading a retelling, or should you need to read the source material before reading a retelling? Are they separate? Are they so closely connected that you need that background? All that. So I really got thinking about this after two reads that I read last month. One of them was The Dream Quest of Villette Beau by Kiz Johnson, which is kind of a response to a H.P. Lovecraft story. And then Vasta in the Night by Sarah Porta, which is inspired by Vasilina the Beautiful, which is a Baba Yaga story. Both of these books, I felt like I might have enjoyed them more if I would have known the source material. I liked both of them on their own, but having the source material I think would have elevated these books even further, especially for the Kiz Johnson one. I didn't go into it knowing that this was a response to or slash retelling of, it's more of like a continuation of that H.P. Lovecraft story, so there was really no opportunity for me to necessarily dive into that source material, but I probably wouldn't have anyway because I'm not a huge Lovecraft fan anyway, but this one would, I think, be really good for fans of that genre in general because it definitely is a response. With Vasta in the Night, I am kind of familiar with Baba Yaga, and the reason I picked this up and I wanted to get to this was because of the Baba Yaga myth. Because there is some Baba Yaga in Uprooted by Naomi Novik, and it's not a direct retelling or anything. It has some elements of the myth and mentions kind of Baba Yaga in there, and I love that book. But that book isn't necessarily retelling, it just has those themes in it. So knowing how much I loved that book, I was interested in this book to see more of that Baba Yaga stuff. But this book is so much weirder that it was hard for me to kind of get at all connected to this, because I think if I knew the source material, it would have definitely been pinging for certain events in the story because I would have known that source material. And there's definitely retellings that I specifically do seek out because I like their source material. So Beauty and the Beast retellings, if I hear that, I typically want to read it. And of course, the beloved Hades and Persephone retellings. Like, I know that source material, I want to see how it's interpreted, and I think it does make my enjoyment of the story obviously tenfold because I'm looking for certain things, but I'm also more critical of certain things. So with Hades Persephone, obviously I've talked about this before, it's very hard for me to find my perfect retelling, and I haven't yet because I'm so critical of it. So at the same time, it's like I do seek out these stories and these retellings and these inspired bys, but does that make me enjoy it less because I'm so much more critical of it and I want my like perfect retelling? So it'd be better for me to seek out stories that I am not as familiar with but just have like a base understanding of. So where's that sweet spot with retellings where you are not super familiar with it, so you're not like critiquing everything about it, but you know enough about it that you are lost or anything? I personally tend to really enjoy and prefer stories where there are things that are inspired by or themes of but aren't direct retellings. So the previously mentioned Uprooted by Naomi Novik is definitely inspired by a lot of Polish and Russian folklore that I'm not super familiar with, but it had enough of that taste that I really enjoyed it and I wanted more from it. I really wanted to seek out more of those kinds of stories because I loved this one so much. But I wasn't critical of those stories or critical of the themes that it was using because I didn't know a ton about that. I also really tend to enjoy stories that are very lightly inspired by an original story, so I really liked A Court of Mist and Fury by Sarah J. Maas. It is kind of inspired by the Hades Persephone myth, but it's not a direct retelling whatsoever. It has some elements that it points to that is kind of a nod to people who do enjoy the myth, but these are not the same characters, this is not the same kind of like plot points or anything, so I can't overly critique it for its Hades Persephone stuff. I can critique it for other reasons, but I can't critique it for that because it's not a direct retelling of it. So I tend to enjoy books that take themes or take like certain little plot points or whatever and twist them and make them their own, and not books that are direct retellings. Like the Goddess Test series by Amy Carter, this is a pretty direct retelling. It's a little bit of a spin on stuff, but it has the gods, it has everything that Hades Persephone has. But I was critiquing this one so much because the characterization, I feel, is so wrong. So I know too much about this myth to sometimes enjoy the stories about it. I do have hope. I have some books on my TBR that I'm hoping will finally fit the bill for my perfect Hades and Persephone, but I do think it's harder because I am so familiar with it. One book that I'm really going to enjoy because I think it's going to sit in that sweet spot for me is As I Descended by Robin Talley. This is a lesbian Macbeth retelling, and I am not super familiar with Macbeth, but Macbeth and anything by Shakespeare is a very common pop culture reference. So even if you're not super familiar with it, you will notice things that have referenced it before that you're familiar with, so you can definitely pick up on stuff. So I think this is where I enjoy Macbeth. I know enough about it, but I'm not a like scholar of Shakespeare by any means, so I'm not going to be ripping it apart. I also think The Lunar Chronicles by Marissa Meyer did a really good job of being inspired by those stories and using those stories, but not being direct retellings of it. So it was enough fun, and it wasn't like something you could overly critique because it definitely wasn't a direct retelling. It's a futuristic, its own kind of story retelling, and I think that's what made it so successful. Those are just a few examples. So generally speaking, it is kind of a dice roll for me on whether I'm really going to enjoy something that's a retelling or not. Like I said, sometimes I do see something out that I'm not super familiar with, but then I find that I'm not familiar enough with it, so I don't know enough to like really enjoy it. But then sometimes I find books that I'm seeking out because I'm really familiar with it, and then I don't enjoy it because I'm so critical. So finding that sweet spot for retellings for me, especially since they're such a popular genre right now, is hard. So comment below and let me know how you feel about this. Do you feel like you need to read the source material before reading a retelling? Do you seek out ones that you just think are interesting, that you don't really know a lot about the myths or the stories behind them, but you want to know more, you want to see how they do it? Or do you seek out ones that are like, you're super familiar with this, you're a really big fan of it, so you're always going to seek it out? Comment down below and let me know. So thank you all for watching, and I'll see all of you guys soon. Bye!